I would like to talk to this caller, Davan, perhaps, about the soul. And maybe, Davan, you could... It's up to you if you want to call Kenneth Daddy, but, you're totally welcome.
Neither encouraged nor mandatory. Please.
But yeah, Davan, how can you want to explain how a soul exists?
Well, actually, I think that the components are there. I actually don't believe in a soul in the fashion of religion. I believe that religion has a textual example of what they were experiencing back in ancient past, and they deemed it a soul, but it was really the beginning workings of a soul. The idea of evolution creating something that would be similar to a soul.
When you're saying a soul, are you thinking of something supernatural, or are you just using the word soul to describe some natural part of humans? For example, you might be saying a soul as in some magical ghost which comes out of us and goes to heaven, but you also might be saying soul as in like what makes humans art and things, what makes humans human compared to chimpanzees or something. But in that sense, I would say that was like purely just a function of our brains. Like, in which way are you using the word?
Concerning the question itself, I actually don't know for certainty. When I look back at the texts of multiple different religions, they talk of specific experiences, and I've had multiple experiences of what's generally called an out-of-body experience. Now, because I'm extremely rationally minded, I believe it to only be a dream. But every experience of that out-of-body experience would tell me that something has actually left the physical body. In other words, the only reason why I believe that it's a dream is because I'm rationally minded. I'm overly skeptical about anything that I want to believe. But the actual experience itself, I have no reason to believe.
Some out-of-body experiences feel quite convincing, I guess. But like you say, so do some dreams. So
I'm wondering where you would point to this experience taking place. Like, where do your experiences happen?
Usually as I'm laying down in my bed, getting ready to try to go to sleep or meditate or whatnot.
I don't mean any specific experiences. I'm saying all experiences. Where do your experiences happen? For you to experience something, where does experience take place?
Oh, you're talking about internally in the brain. Where does it take place?
Yeah.
Well, maybe, because some people would say that. Some people would say that their soul is responsible for experiencing things. And what I tend to want to do is go, okay, well, what does the evidence tell us about where our experience happens? Our experiences can be altered by, or our experience of reality can be altered by altering the chemistry of our brains. There's substances that you can take, if you have ranging from coffee to psychedelics, right? People tell me. So when someone says to me that they've had an out-of-body experience, is there any reason to think that experience is...
I've already specified that being a very literal and very scientifically minded individual, I'm relegating it to it being nothing more than a dream.
Okay. Yeah. So
what I'm trying to specify simply is that think about a dream in and of itself. You can go flying out into space. You can go see dragons and all sorts of different kinds of monsters. Is it really so absurd to think that your brain can come up with an illusion of your bedroom with your physical body laying down on the bed?
Right. So what I'm trying to point to,
if anything, you'd think that would be more common because it's something that your brain doesn't need to invent as much.
And exactly. If we think of if we know that experiences happen at the level of our brains, then I'm wondering if what you're telling us is that this idea of a soul was a way for people who didn't know anything about our brains to try to explain the phenomena of experience. But I'm wondering how any given experience could be evidence. I'm wondering how any given experience could be evidence for a soul if we know that experiences are actually the, brain things.
Okay, so first and foremost, you're actually hitting the nail on the head as to what the people in the past were writing about as far as what I'm thinking.
Sure.
They were experiencing something and they were doing their best to explain what they were experiencing, and they dubbed it a soul. Now, there is the factor of what's referred to as proprioception, one of our multiple senses. Lots of people hear the 5 senses, where there's actually many more than 5. Proprioception is merely a simple concept of knowing where your limbs are without actually having to look at them.
Yeah, it's an awareness of spatial relationship related to your body.
Yeah, there's lots of different senses.
Right. So if the question is, does a soul exist? I just would go back to, I understand that pre-scientific folks,
I'm not saying that a soul does exist.
Right. I'm not saying that you are. Yeah. I'm just saying, sorry, go ahead and keep going.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying my hardest not to step on you guys, and my phone is
all good
for some reason glitching out a little bit. I recognize that. I believe that through an evolutionary process, that something like a soul could potentially exist. I think that all the pieces are there, like a puzzle. They're just not put together in the right place. Much like how evolution ends up screwing up what is best for I should have actually looked this up before I decided to call in.
I'm wondering if soul is not a well-defined concept in your mind. If you're referring to a quality of experience or something like consciousness, then I'm wondering why we're using the soul label.
Yeah, because I think for me, when someone says soul, I'm only really interested in whether they're claiming there's some supernatural component to your existence, which has some properties other than just what your brain does. Because if we just call a part of your brain or your personality or something your soul, then I just trivially agree it exists. That's cool, whatever. But if there's a supernatural part, then I want to find out how we prove that exists or not. And my current position is we can quite convincingly, or I'm convinced that there just isn't a part, because you can just cut bits of people's brains out and then they're just a different person and they think different and they act different. And that wouldn't, what is left? What part of a supernatural component? What information does that carry about someone if it's not going to have their personality or their memories or their emotions or their reactions or anything in it?
Yeah.
So I agree with you, this idea that, there's some experience that people have, even if it's a dream or whatever, and people go, that we'll call that a soul. But then with our current knowledge today, we can say, well, does this make sense? Can all this be explained by a brain? And then also, why would we assume there's some supernatural component? But even if we do assume it, then can we show that it exists or not? And I think the answer is no. So I guess that's why we're asking, which part do you consider it?
The problem is that most people take a very specific type of view of a soul, when in fact, and I actually had this conversation with a couple other individuals, Judaism does not actually take a concept of supernatural in the fashion that you're probably thinking of. Orthodox Judaism believes that the soul would die with the body.
But that's I don't care. I don't care.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was just saying, is that if it's just some part of your brain, if we're just if the part of you that we could describe as your personality, and we just say, that's the soul, and it's in your brain, and I can cut a bit of it out and change it, and when you die, it dies. Like, okay, we can call that a soul if you want, but that's kind of uninteresting. We could call
Well,
anything a
that's
soul, really. But what's interesting is if
That's
someone's
what was
claiming
being-
there's something else.
that was actually what was being discussed by the ancients, if you actually, or I say ancients, by ancient writings. It's only in more modern writings that things became more of what you're probably referencing as supernatural. But the idea
Right.
of a soul in and of itself by the individuals who wrote more ancient writings was something that could be explained very physically.
Right, and I think that it's interesting that our idea of what some of these concepts are has changed over time, and there might even be situations like this where they were just describing some, natural part of humans, but they didn't have all of the knowledge that we have today and all of the understanding, and they just had this kind of. They were aware that people have a personality and memories and emotions and stuff, and they just lump all that together and they say that's your soul. They didn't necessarily know what brains are and brains did and stuff, and they write that down. And then as we've learnt more and more about what brains do, then that's left less and less space for what people call a soul, and then it ends up sort of being relegated to a new concept, and this new concept of what a soul might develop over time, where they say, oh well, it's none of those things, it's not your brain, it's something else. And quite possibly, I mean, I'm not an expert in the history of souls or how they've been recorded, but I can certainly see that being possibly true, which I guess is an argument against the writings being false.
Part of that is what I'm saying, but part of it goes against what I'm saying. The development of what is called the soul is far different than what the ancients were talking about as a soul. What the ancients were what people 3,000, 4,000 years ago were talking about as a soul can be completely 100% explained by physical, rational explanations.
Wait a minute. Hang on. Let me ask you this: the people, when you're talking about the conceptual soul in an ancient context here, are you talking about something that survives after the death of the body?
No, in fact, that's what I ended up specifying. Orthodox Judaism doesn't even accept the idea of a soul existing past the death of the body without a God.
Keyword being there without God, right? Key being there without a God, right? The qualifier. But in Orthodox Judaism and other religious traditions, they would agree that there's a God, right? That keeps your soul alive as this thing that exists on another plane after you're
that keeps it alive.
dead.
In which case, if a God does not exist, it won't stay alive. In other words, it dies with the body.
But that would apply to everything in that worldview, right? Like everything is sustained by God in these religious traditions, right?
Yeah, they premise God existing in their explanations. I don't think that's like a sudden little counter where if you disprove God, then suddenly, oh wow, we've taken out one of your premises. Like they would screw up their entire worldview. And
yeah, and here's where I'm sort of like reaching like limits to my patience, because I have no idea what we're talking about at this point. Because if what you're saying is there's this conception of the soul as being this thing that is essentially synonymous with our consciousness or having a quality of experience, and there's an evolutionary basis for human beings having the ability to experience the world around them. Yeah, cool, fine. But if we're talking about a soul, and as Katy pointed out, if we're talking about a soul in a religious context, we're talking about something very, 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 very different. We're talking about something that's like this ghost in the machine that makes us who we are, that has some relationship to a spiritual realm. We're talking about something different. So what I'm just going to ask very, very directly is, I'm wondering, what is the point of your call?
I just got a beep in the middle or right after you said that, so I don't actually know if I'm currently online or not. So,
you are online. So
okay.
You are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'm just really succinctly, what's the point?
My intention for calling was first and foremost the idea of the soul as it originally brought about or was brought about by text exists, and I believe that it can go further.
What do you mean by
believe
go
that it can
further?
actually become something more just through the simple concept of evolution.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So I guess the
My
reason why me and
apologies.
Kenneth are
I
kind of
have
sorry,
to
sorry.
admit, I have to admit that the idea is not very fleshed out. It's still very new in my mind, even after 2 years, because I haven't had very many individuals to talk with. I
That's
will
okay.
try to figure out a better way to explain it, and then I'll call back.
This sounds like a great
for
thing
future,
for the Facebook group.
I think it could be an interesting call. I guess for future, like when you call back next time, why I guess how me and Kenneth are coming at this is if you imagine all of these different components of a human, if we're saying a soul is, and then the components it points to are just bits of our brain have evolved over time, like that, okay, fair enough, but that's uninteresting in the sense that we all probably agree that brains are real and that humans have personalities as a result. That's cool, and I agree that over time evolution will change them, and etc. etc. That's fine. But what we would find interesting would be if someone called in and said, "Oh, well, maybe as well as, or instead as, just parts of your brain, a soul has some other component which isn't controlled by your brain, that is kept alive by a god or whatever that means." And if that's the case, we want to be able to say, okay, well, firstly, what are you claiming? Like, there's a part of a human which isn't in their brain or their body. That's like the claim. And okay, now we know what you're trying to say. And secondly, what is the evidence for that? And can we have a discussion saying that maybe there is evidence that doesn't exist? And that, I guess that when people say souls, I get that you're coming up with an older definition, perhaps. That's fine. And you could say, oh, well, they used to be describing this. And then okay, does that mean they were describing just parts of humans? Okay, cool, trivial, uninteresting. Or were they also explaining non-physical parts, in which case suddenly it's a conversation we'd happily debate on this show. do you see like the distinction I'm making there?
I think I understand, and in which case I have not actually gotten to that part. Do I believe that maybe in 100 generations we might actually be capable of becoming non-physical? Yeah, I believe that is a possibility. I haven't actually firmly rooted that part of this generalized discussion. My first primary idea was the discussion of the original beliefs of a soul. So yeah, I definitely need to take some time. And as I specified, I do believe it possible in no less than probably 100 generations.
I think that would be an interesting topic for next time, because I'm unsure quite where you're going with that. But we probably do need to move on, and so go and have a chat with some people on go in the Facebook group or in the Discord. We'll talk about those in a bit, and then and we'll hear from you again in the future. But thanks a lot for calling in, Davan.